Welcome back to Secretariat Timing is Everything here at the American Film Institute Theater in Silver Spring, Maryland. So we've established the greatness of this horse, which was confirmed when he destroyed the track record in the Kentucky Derby, 1:59 and 2/5 seconds, one of only two to ever break 2 minutes, Monarchos being the other in 2001. But then came the Preakness. Now first, let's talk about this race. Ronnie, that move around the first turn, a breathtaking move. Was that his decision or yours?
Well, I thought all the time I rode the horse, I was in control. That was my opinion. And anyway, I had ridden him from behind in the Kentucky Derby. I had given him a chance because of the Wood Memorial, which is something I didn't mention before, and I will bring it up now. Probably none. I know I haven't heard it, never read it, that the horse broke through the gate before the Wood Memorial, which could have indicated to me, as well as to anybody else, that there was something wrong with his mouth. Because when the assistant starter tried to stop him when he came in the gate, he threw his head, hit the gate opened, and we went out. We had to bring him back around, and anyway, that's not a question you asked me now, so I'm going to answer your question. So after having ridden him that way, preserving him for the last part, enough horse to run the whole mile and a quarter, when I came to the Derby, I was so confident in him that I just grabbed a hold of him, and when I went to drop in, I picked up my head, and I saw everybody had been driving the first quarter, and now they were all taking a hold of their horse, and that's when we flew under the radar. We just caught everybody with their pants down, excuse the word, and we just blew by them, took a hold of him after I passed everybody, which I didn't really ask him that much to run anyway, for him to go on that way. But I did take him out and let him run some, and just put my hands back down, and then we cruised the rest of the way home.
So we're joined here by author, editor, and reporter Steve Davidowitz, and he was there that day when Secretariat won the Preakness. You looked at the teletimer, and I'm guessing you thought it didn't look quite right. What do you remember?
Well, that wasn't exactly my first thoughts. I was still awed by the move that the horse made on the first turn. I did not see in my years of covering racing a few years now in Maryland any horse ever win a race with a move like that outside horses on that first turn. And I don't think there's been 2 or 3 in the history of Pimlico that have ever done anything close to that, regardless of the class level or race. So I was still awed by that. And then there was some after the races session, or dinner or whatever, and I was speaking with a Daily Racing Form writer named Jack Zariah, who was downplaying the performance that Secretariat put up based on the time. And I said, well, what did he run? Because I didn't even notice the time at that point. And he went on 155. And I said, what, really? I said, I don't know. That sounds a little funny. And then within an hour, another reporter, Clem LaFlorio of the Baltimore News American, may he rest in peace, brought it to my attention that Frenchie Schwartz, the clocker for Daily Racing Form, was up in the press box, and along with another clocker on the opposite end of the press box, timed the race in 1:53 and 2, which would have been a track record. And Clem and I spent about an hour later that evening debating whether or not there was anything to this discrepancy, and he reminded me that there were issues with the Pimlico teletimer that stretched back several years. In fact, there was a track record, 6-furlong track record, credited to a filly named Frances Flower in 109, and she actually ran, Clem said, 112. There were problems with the teletimer. So I went home, and I happened to have a tape of the Canyonero track record performance, and I had taped the Secretariat performance. And the only technology I had at that time to do anything about it was to unspool the tapes, both of both races, and Secretariat's was considerably shorter.
He's dating himself here, by the way.
I don't mind, truthfully, you know, I don't. I'm happy to be here right now. So, but in any case, I examined it as best as I could, and I actually wrote a 4-page chronology of what I thought might have happened, blah, blah, blah. And I sent it to Chick Lang, who is the general manager of Pimlico. Chick Lang has 2 major credits in his career that I think he should never be forgotten for. One is that he was the jockey agent for Bill Hardtack at the peak of his career. And he also was the man who promoted the Preakness to nobody else's, like he was the Matt Wynn of Pimlico, and made the Preakness into what it has become. But on the negative side, he had the sensitivity about the teletimer, that I guess he had some involvement in getting the teletimer set up, the company and what have you, and he would hear none of it, that there was a possibility that a record had been established. So I sent my material along to Bill Creasy of the CBS television network, and he, I believe, was the producer of the shows. And I asked him point blank if there would be any way that he could contact Ms. Chenery and or the Maryland Racing Commission and see if anything could be checked into this, and the story unfolded from there, but it has taken 40 years for the record to finally be changed.
Ms. Chenery, when did you become aware that this was an issue? When did it become a thorn in your side?
I think when some reporter brought it up.
Blame the media.
Yeah. I was just thrilled to have won. I was not thinking about the time, and you have not experienced the flood of media attention you get when you win a classic race. But I had no time to process this information, and truthfully, I didn't care. I thought, I got the best horse, whether the clock is right or not.
But it obviously became an issue for you at some point because you continued lobbying the Maryland Racing
Yes.
Commission. When did it start to matter to you?
I'd say it was probably 2 days after the race that you have time to let everything sink in. And Lucian was really not the one, but he urged me to apply to the Maryland Racing Commission for a rehearing. And in their wisdom, it was not granted.
Charlsie Cantey has been an ESPN and ABC racing analyst for a very long time and has lived many years down here in the Maryland area. What kind of buzz was there at this point in Maryland and in New York where you were writing about this story?
Well, all of this happened before I started doing television. I was galloping horses in New York, so I wasn't present actually having seen this horse train literally every single day of his life. I was not at any one of his Triple Crown races. So I was kind of getting it the way everyone else was, you know, third hand through the media and getting the feedback. I just remember watching the Preakness on TV, on a monitor, and thinking, what am I seeing? I mean, that move around the turn, I mean, not only the most extraordinary move at Pimlico, probably the most extraordinary move around a first turn I've ever seen anywhere in my life. And I think that the time became irrelevant to me. And I think, obviously, for his legacy, for 40 years, it has not diminished his, you know, his yardstick of him being, his own frame of reference. So it didn't take anything away, but he earned it and he should have had it. And I'm really glad that it finally happened, because it's now the period is on the end of a fabulous sentence.
I believe we have an audience question about that move on the first turn.
Jason Boggs from Philadelphia. I just wish I was as eloquent as Bill Knack with words to say what it means to be in the room with these people here. But Ron, my question is for you. In your opinion, from your vantage point on top of the horse in the Triple Crown races, do you think the horse was running faster in that first turn in the Preakness or that final quarter mile in the Belmont?
It was running faster around the turn. He was the kind of horse that really loved to run around turns. After the race, I didn't look at the teletimer, but when I went upstairs to the press box, the first guy that ran into me was Joe Hirsch. He says, Ronnie, do you think the time is right on this, in this race? And that's the first time I looked at the teletimer. I said, hell no. So he says, well, he says, I got him on a certain time. I don't recall exactly the time he told me. I said, well, I'll take your time over the one I just looked at. And that's about all I heard for a day or two until we were flying to Massachusetts. We were running River Ridge in the mast cap. And on the plane, Mrs. Chenery, Mr. Lauren, myself, that's when it really came up where CBS was going to run the races together and so on. That's when I heard that they were going to have some proof that they broke the record.
Mr. Knack, you were with this horse day in and day out as they were. When did this story start to foment in your eyes?
I mean, at the Preakness?
Right.
Well, the Derby was the most spectacular Kentucky Derby ever run. The Preakness was the most spectacular Preakness ever run. And of course, the Belmont was the most spectacular Belmont ever run. But as I came up after the Kentucky Derby, it was a performance for the ages. And it announced the horse. It really announced him. It's when he said, I'm Muhammad Ali of horse flesh. I am the Michael Jordan of horses. He sort of transcended ordinary standards. He ran every quarter mile in the Kentucky Derby faster than the preceding quarter. He went 25, 24 and 4, 24 and 2, 23 and
You can't cut backward.
yeah. And in other words, he was going 35 miles an hour the first time by the stands at Churchill, and he was going 39 miles an hour the second time. He was going about close to 5 miles an hour faster. His last quarter was in 23. His last half mile at Churchill was in 46 and 2. Horses don't do that. And it was so incredible the way he did it. And so when he came to Pimlico, you'd think that he would ease him up a little bit, and Lucian put the screws to him and worked him 5/8 and 57 and 2. And he galloped out 3/4 of a mile in 1:10 flat, which is the same time that the best sprinter in Maryland, Lee Matt, had just won a stake. He was running as fast in the morning as horses were in the afternoon. And when I saw the running time of 1:55, I thought it was really crazy. It didn't make any sense. And I learned later well, you want me to tell a story about who I was standing with during the race?
Sure. We've got plenty of time.
Well, I left the saddling area on the infield where Lucian saddled a horse and put Ronnie up, and I went up to the jockey's porch right by the finish line because that's the best place to see it. I wanted to sacrifice seeing it from the press box in order to be able to get down on the racetrack real fast so I could see Ronnie when he came back smiling. So I was standing next to a guy, and I turned and said, what's your name? And he said, I'm E.T. McLean. I said, what do you do? He said, I am the racetrack clocker. And I said, well, how can you clock from here? The finish line, or the starting gate is about almost a quarter of a mile away, and the horses are coming right at you. How can you time from here? He said, well, I'm not clocking today. I said, oh, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm in charge of crowd control. And so he said, I'm going to go down on the racetrack and clear the crowds out so when the horses come back. And I said, gee, I'm going to go down there too. We'll go down together. I'm going to meet Turcotte when he comes back. And so he never had a clock in his hand that I know of. And nobody was more shocked than I when I found out later that his running time that he had clocked in 1:54 and 2 had become the official time of the racetrack. And I thought, very unusual. Is he here, by the way, Mr. McLean? I don't know. I think he retired somewhere, but I want to ask him sometime,
Where was his watch?
where was your watch? And how could you clock the Preakness with horses coming directly at you? Jack Harmon is here, the official clocker, and I'm sure he can tell you it's very difficult to do that. But in any event, that made me feel I never really believed the running time. Even if he had a watch and he clicked it, he wasn't in a place to do it accurately, and so I thought the clocking would be flawed. And he clicked it about 7/5 of a second too soon. So anyway, that's what.
This mystery will take an even deeper turn after the break when we find out why it took 39 years to get to the bottom of this story. Stay with us.